Hello and welcome back to another episode of the For the Property Investor podcast. And we're here with the weekly news segment again. And of course, the only person that can bring us the weekly news is Nick Bendall. Thank you, Nick.
Well, thank you for having me, Owen. Always great to join you.
Oh, it's really our pleasure, and the listeners and watchers. It's their pleasure as well, I'm sure.
Well, I'm glad they enjoy it so much as well.
So what's been happening in your world this week, Nick?
Well, it was a really good week, enjoyable, busy. My business, Hunter and Scribe, we're a copywriting agency that writes content for finance and property professionals. We work with lots of mortgage brokers around Australia, and we happened to sign up 2 new mortgage broker clients last week.
Fantastic. Well done. Congratulations. And yes, for us in the past week, it's been it was a short week for us with the public holiday last Monday, so it was a very busy one. So catching up a little bit from that Monday off, and we've got quite a few buyers agents that I spoke to later in the week that are looking at coming on board with us as well. So looking forward to that. But what's bringing us the news this week, Nick?
Well, we've got 3 different types of stories. The first one starts in Queensland. Queensland gives increased concessions to first home buyers. The Queensland government has unveiled Homes for Queenslanders, a $3.1 billion investment into housing and homelessness initiatives. As part of this package, owner-occupier first home buyers will no longer pay stamp duty on properties valued up to $700,000. The previous threshold was $500,000, and will receive a partial concession on homes valued at up to $800,000, up from $550,000. That will increase the maximum value of stamp duty relief from $8,750 to $17,350. Also, owner-occupier first-home buyers will no longer pay stamp duty on vacant land valued at up to $500,000, up from the previous threshold of $400,000, and that will increase the maximum value of stamp duty relief from $7,175 to $10,675. It's estimated that these stamp duty changes will benefit about 10,000 first-home buyers. Keen as always to get your thoughts, Owen. What do you think of the Queensland government's decision to increase the stamp duty thresholds for first-home buyers?
Well, we're really just looking at a election coming up, and they're just really they're just announcing something that should be taken care of due to the increase in values of properties in Queensland. I mean, you can't be buying anything, especially a house, under 500,000 in southeast Queensland now. It's near on impossible. So they really just had to deal with this bracket creep of a sort when it comes to stamp duty relief. So it's really just fixing that up. It's and playing politics with an election coming up. So yeah, no real surprise there. Of course, the issue is it's not really fixing the supply issue that is causing all of this homelessness and price increases. All it is fueling more demand.
Well, I believe it had been about a decade since the indexation was changed. So this is catching up for lost time.
Yes, really.
And stamp duty in general is an interesting one. State governments need money to fund their activities, and a lot of this money comes from stamp duty. With that in mind, is stamp duty a reasonable tax, or should it be replaced with something else?
Well, if we keep state government budgets in mind all the time, then yes, every tax is a reasonable tax. But But in general, stamp duty is very unreasonable as a tax because it doesn't really benefit anyone except for the government's coffers. There's no, it doesn't fuel or support anything directly. It's really just a tax for the sake of having a tax. There would be much better ways of taxing property. And because, yes, the state governments need the revenue. And yes, there's no reason why we shouldn't have a tax on property owners. And because they're reaping the benefits of owning a property over the long term. But that's where I think we might have spoken about it before in previous episodes, Nick, and it's something that's definitely a pet subject of mine, where stamp duty could easily be replaced if not wholly, at least partially, by a broader based land tax. And I know the the previous New South Wales state government had looked at doing this and started implementing a trial with some first home buyers, but that was quickly squashed by the lack of foresight from the now current New South Wales government. Um, so it's something that is going to or could have a lot more benefits. It can be uh, used to manipulate the market a lot better based on the conditions of the market, and so allow a lot of people to. Well, actually, I can give an example. I was talking to someone who is looking to downsize last week. She's essentially a retiree, still working part-time, but she was wanting to downsize from a two-story house down to a single-level house. And the stamp duty on the purchase that she was going to make after selling was going to be over $100,000. Now, and she would still need to make modifications to this new property and maybe spend some more money on it to make it ideal for her purposes as she became older into her life, and so it wasn't so looking at that amount of money to have to spend on downsizing, plus there'd be selling costs as well for where she currently is. It just doesn't add up. Doesn't make sense. You might as well put that money into the current property that you're already living in and make it work for you there. So with a broader based land tax where it was higher on a higher value property, if you're looking to downsize and go into a property that is cheaper, then at least that might not attract as much land tax or even zero, depending on the value, then you've got a lot more benefits there. And it gives a lot more flexibility to be able to give people the choice to be able to sell rather than being stuck in this big mansion that they can't afford to upkeep because they don't have the income. And it's stopping a lot of young families from getting into these bigger properties because a lot of older people aren't selling them.
Stamp duty is inefficient, as you're pointing out, and I think politicians on both sides aren't really all that keen on stamp duty. I think, from what I understand, they would like to replace it with land tax. But the problem is, while you can design a land tax so that it raises as much money over the long term as stamp duty, there's a big short-term hit. And the question is, how are you going to fund that? I think New South Wales wanted the federal government to fund that. The feds didn't want to play ball. So I guess the question is, if you are going to phase it out, you're going to cop a short-term financial hit, and that in turn means you're probably going to cop a short-term political hit with your voters. And so I think state governments feel, you know what, it's just easier to keep what we've already got.
Yes, and unfortunately, it is a matter of politics and funding the budget in the short term, and that's where there was that initiative from the previous New South Wales state government to try and bring it in with a staged release, with at least for first home buyers, giving them the option to take it on as a land tax rather than paying a lump sum over and above the threshold for the free stamp duty, because at least that would, especially for younger couples who are both working, they've got the income, they can definitely afford to pay the ongoing tax, but they didn't have the savings to be able to get in with paying a stamp duty on top to be able to get into a property. So, and that's the big difference. If we want people to be able to get into a property for themselves, stamp duty is something that holds them back so much.
Well, let's move on to a slightly different story. This one, kind of a fun story. I like this one. Property prices surge over the long term. Which capital city has experienced the most house price growth over the past 20 years? The latest Australian Bureau of Statistics data has the answer. Over the 20 years to March, median house prices increased by 246% in Hobart, 206% in Adelaide, 178 in Brisbane, 175 in Perth, 166 in Melbourne, 158 in Sydney, 154 in Canberra, and 130% in Darwin. Owen, Hobart topped the list with 246% growth, house price growth over the past 20 years. Why has the Hobart market grown so strongly over the past 2 decades?
I think it might be a matter of, there's statistics and then there's statistics. It's and I'm sure these statistics are absolutely correct, but it's just a matter of looking at the timing. If we looked at the last 15 years, or if we looked at it again in 5 years' time for the previous 20 years, then I think the order would be drastically different. So it's I mean, firstly, Hobart is a much lower price point, and it might have, 18 years ago, I'm not sure off the top of my head, 18 years ago, it might have had a price growth spurt at that time, and there was one not so recent, not that long ago, and there might have been one in the middle as well. So it's whereas Sydney 20 years ago it had just come off a very high peak, and it didn't grow much at all until another sort of 8 years, 8 or 9 years. So almost half of those 20 years, Sydney was very stagnant. So, but then it's in the last 10 years, it's had massive growth. And so, yes, it's if we looked at the last 10 years or even the last 15 years, the order would be very different. And yeah, so it's yeah, statistics.
Well, it sounds like you believe 43% of statistics are questionable.
Only half the time.
Interestingly, so Hobart was at the top with 246% over the past 20 years. Darwin was at the bottom, 130% house price growth over the past 20 years. And I believe Darwin's peak was 2014. So we still haven't returned to that 2014 peak. Why is it that Darwin has underperformed and had such a topsy-turvy market?
There's population. There's you have to look at what industry they have to be able to attract more population growth, and it's not an area, as you said, in 2014. That was the only time that I remember Darwin coming up as a place to possibly buy. but it hasn't really done much since. So it's there's just not a lot there for industry and people to be able to have a high demand.
And another thing that caught my eye with these 20-year house price growth statistics, I saw that Brisbane, Perth, Melbourne, and Sydney grew in a very narrow band, so between 158 and 178%. And over the course of 20 years, that means if we look at it on an average annual growth rate, they would have had very, very similar average annual growth rates. So I'm wondering, Owen, can we expect our 4 biggest cities to always grow at about the same rate over the long term, not the short term, but the long term? Or is this just a coincidence?
Um, Not necessarily a coincidence. It's those 4 major cities will always have growth. I mean, we could even take Perth out of it. You know, it's even though that might change in the future as it grows to be a bigger city, but it's something that they'll always continue to grow on average. When you look at a 20-year average, about that same. But it's you need to look at timing. Coming back to my first answer, you can look at these statistics and go and try and read into it, but the numbers will skew depending on which past 20 years you're looking at. So yeah, Perth is still growing now, and it's going to be hitting its peak at some point in the next year or so. We would expect, but and then it might stay flat for another 10 years, like it did after the last boom that it had. And same with Sydney. We had our peak a couple of years ago, and then now it's recovered again, but nice and slowly. And is it going to keep on going? But it's not booming like it was 4 years ago. So it's just a matter of looking at the timing, and that's why a lot of people are still buying in Perth at the moment. A lot of people are still buying in Adelaide as well for those reasons, and Brisbane is still strong, so a lot of people are still buying there. But Brisbane has definitely slowed down a lot compared to, say, 2 years ago.
Our final story today is an economic story. Unemployment rate falls. The national unemployment rate has made a surprise improvement, ticking down from 4.1% in April to 4% in May. Even though the economy has been slowing over the past 18 months, unemployment remains very low by historical standards. As I said, it's 4% now, but in records going back to 1978, the unemployment rate has averaged 6.6%. The unemployment rate is one of the key indicators the Reserve Bank analyses when making decisions about the cash rate. With unemployment this low, it will be hard for the Reserve Bank to reduce interest rates, as it will be wary of overheating the economy and putting upward pressure on inflation. Okay, I've asked you this before, but I'm keen to get your feeling again. Falling unemployment means more people have jobs, and that the cash rate is likely to stay higher for longer. So should we be happy or sad that unemployment fell?
It's we're happy for the people that have got jobs and that they can afford to pay their rent and pay their mortgage and put food on the table. That's great. Like best case scenario is everyone keeps their jobs, and we all start to save a little bit and not spend as much, and it's and then inflation comes down, and which means interest rates can then start coming down. But we unfortunately we don't live in a utopian society. They've tried that. It's called communism, but yeah, it's doesn't work. Yeah, people act for themselves, and then the collective determines what how we have to make those big macroeconomic decisions. So yes, the figures are actually surprising from my point of view. I was expecting unemployment to start going up, and um, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, if unemployment did start to go up, then we would have a higher expectation of interest rates to come down sooner.
Further to that, Australia has now had 4 consecutive quarters of negative per capita growth. So even though the kind of the nominal figures show the economy's been getting larger, in per capita terms, growth has been going backwards. And that's because the population has been growing faster than the economy. So even though the pie has been getting bigger, everyone's slice has been getting smaller. And again, to kind of put this to you, Owen, with that in mind, given that we are in a per capita recession, are you surprised that unemployment continues to remain so low?
Yes, but we are still growing, and it's technically we're not in a recession, and because of the population growth, and the federal government, I think on purpose, was probably fueling this population growth because no government wants a recession on their watch. So if we're going to be looking at the rest of this year and what's going to happen with the economy, we're going to have to make hard decisions about, we have to stop the high immigration to be able to help the housing situation and the housing shortage crisis. But it's a double-edged sword. It'll stop fueling the economy. And obviously, from the unemployment rate, there seems to be a high demand for workers. And especially in the construction industry, that's for sure. We need more trades to be able to build all the houses that we need to live in. So, yes, it's a double-edged sword. I'm glad I'm not making all of the decisions. And it's something that we'll need to look at over the next 12 months, and hopefully we can have that balance. But technically, a lot of people do bring up this per capita recession that they say that we're in technically, but that's fine to measure it on a per capita basis, and that's why a lot of people are hurting. But still, it's not technically a recession. And the federal government has made these choices about immigration to be able to keep the economy going and keep employment going in the sectors that we need it. But they obviously need to turn the dial down a little bit.
Well, another really good chat this week. We talked about unemployment, property prices, stamp duty, interest rates. Always enjoy our chats.
Thanks, Nick. And we'll solve a whole bunch of other world problems next week.
Yeah, I'm surprised there are still problems in the world given how many episodes we've recorded.
Well, that's why, when we're old and grey, or greyer, I should say, we'll still be here fixing it, because the only people without problems are 6 feet under.
Very good point. Well, I look forward to solving some more problems next week.
Thanks, Nick. I look forward to it as well. See you then.